Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we begin with Part 1, Preface and Fundamentals from Questions and Answers, Fundamentals of the Occult Sciences by Manly P. Hall. Questions and Answers, Fundamentals of the Occult Sciences by Manly P. Hall. Preface. All men suffer from certain reasonable doubts concerning life and truth. These uncertainties arise from the complexities of social existence and the contradictions everywhere present in the institutions of theology and science. It is the purpose of the ancient wisdom teachings to answer these reasonable doubts with reasonable answers. A philosophy that cannot explain the mysteries of life intelligently and practically is not worthy of attention. Wise and enlightened sages and scholars have lived in every period of the world's history. The opinions of the deeply learned are useful to all men. Each human being must evolve his own philosophy of life. All personal philosophies should be founded upon adequate and enduring foundations. At no time is man left without an ever-present guide in time of trouble. The great philosophic literature of the world contains answers to all men's questions, but these answers are frequently hidden in a ponderous literature which average persons lack the temerity to attack. It is therefore useful that the teachings of the wise concerning the practical problems of life should be rendered available in a convenient and digested form. In the course of many years of lecturing and teaching, a great number of questions have come to me for solution and explanation. I've classified these questions into general groups for greater convenience in answering. In the present work, the questions have been so worded as to cover as many angles as possible of the subject treated. The answers are derived from the philosophies and religions of many nations and ages. The teachings of most of the world's great spiritual and intellectual leaders are incorporated into the commentary material. For the sake of clarity and simplicity, I have not in every case gone into elaborate details concerning references and authorities. Usually the source of the material is obvious. Details are unnecessary, for the answers represent recognized systems of thought widely studied and generally accepted. If this book of questions and answers proves to be a practical aid in the understanding of certain metaphysical and spiritual problems, I shall publish further volumes taking up other problems and other aspects of the subject. Manly P. Hall, March 15th, 1937. Fundamentals. Part 1. Where do we come from? Why are we here? Where are we going? 2,500 years ago, Gautama Buddha wandered up and down the roads of India, asking the learned saints and philosophers 3 questions: where, whence, and whither. Many wise and mysterious truths Buddha learned from the holy men, but not the answers to these 3 vital questions. After years of wanderings, disillusioned and discouraged by human ignorance of fundamentals, Buddha found within himself the answers which the world could not give. These answers are the essence of Buddhism, and spreading from India, they have come at last to be part of the general heritage of the race. The philosopher acknowledges that Buddha solved the riddle of life. The solution may be summarized as follows. Life is eternal, and man's appearance upon this earth for 70 years and 10 is but an episode in an existence made up of innumerable episodes. The Orientalist thinks of lives as beads strung together upon a thread of endless consciousness. Life is an endless unfoldment towards the real. It is consciousness growing up through experience, with its beginnings in the immeasurable past and its ultimates in the immeasurable future. To the question, where did we come from? The philosopher answers, up from unimaginable beginnings in immeasurable eons of time, up through an inconceivable diversity of forms, through types and species entirely forgotten, from worlds that have long since finished in space, up through electrons, atoms and cells, up through grains of sand, through plants and animals. All the past is man, for never was the time he was not, and he shall cease to be never, up through all the races that have gone before. We were the Atlanteans and Lemurians, we were the Neanderthal man and the Cro-Magnon who scratched their dreams of life in rude pictures upon the walls of caves and painted in strange forms their exploits and their dreams. We were Egypt, Greece and Rome. Our roots are in the infinite, and we are growing up through the finite to finally, in the end, emerge once more into the infinite. Our age is not measured in millions or hundreds of millions of years, but in vast eons. All we have accomplished is stored up in ourselves. We are always becoming. for we are part of the immortal elements of existence. We are the progeny of unknowable space. Why are we here? What we call here and now is but the present moment of infinity. We have always been somewhere and we will always be somewhere, and an instant of this somewhere we call now. We flow from the past into the present and never ceasing flow through the present into the future. Our present state is the substance of the past, built upon it. We must forever do the next thing next. We are here to learn, to experience, to improve, to progress. We are living down the past and up to the future. We are what we are now because of what we have been. Our present living is but an episode of a greater existence. The true reasons for our living are not evident here, and this little life is truly rounded with a sleep. Law brings us into life. Law is the purpose of our living. Each is in the place he has earned for himself by past action, and each is earning for himself a better place in the ages which are tomorrow. Hundreds of times we have been born into this world, and hundreds of times more we shall be born again, and all our births and deaths together make up one greater life, the purpose of which is but dimly perceptible to our present imperfect realization. We bring into this life the strength and weakness which are the products of our previous living. In this life we refine a little more the fabric of ourselves. Having learned a few more lessons, having found a little more of truth, having done a little more of good, having come a little closer to perfection, we call this life finished, depart for a little time, and then return to continue the task of searching for the real. Where are we going? As we are the past, so we will be the future. Through all the evolution of races and empires we pass, contributing our part to each generation and each age. Thousands of lives stretch before us in the human evolutionary cycle. We are still struggling with our humanity, striving to perfect ourselves in the human virtues, groping for wisdom and courage and the beautiful, trying to bring into moderation all the extremes of our irrational impulses, yearning after the one, the beautiful, and the good. We are indeed on a journey that is endless, for no matter how much of truth we find, the ultimate of truth lies beyond. No matter how much of wisdom we achieve, infinite wisdom lies beyond. In the end, like some great processional, we move in majestic file across the sky from star to star, past all the suns in their glory, to vanish at last triumphantly into the infinite from whence we come, ever striving, ever yearning, ever gazing into space. The progeny of the infinite, we seek to be mingled again with our eternal source. In this search, time is an illusion. An instant is as 1,000 eons, and 1,000 eons are as an instant. It is not time but accomplishment that measures all things. Our final rest is beyond the stars, not in a static heaven of theology's misconception, but as an Eastern poet has said, we come at last back to the root of the dream, one with the eternal. What is God? The answer to this question is largely a matter of viewpoint. Creation is God personalized. God is creation impersonalized. If you mean by a personal God an old man with whiskers seated on a golden throne, then such a concept is irreconcilable with philosophy, because to philosophers such a concept of deity is purely idolatrous. An idol can exist in the mind just as surely as it can in wood or stone. Idolatry is the personification of universal principles. The impersonal God of the wise is that sovereign good, inconceivable and immeasurable, which abides in everything, enlivens and supports all things, ensouls existence, and, in the terms of Brahmin metaphysics, extends to the very circumference of space. Justice is impersonal, truth is impersonal, law is impersonal, virtue is impersonal. All the great and noble events which lift man to the heights of universal achievement are impersonal. Universal survival depends upon the impersonality of that vast cause which supports the entire scheme of life. Yet the impersonal God is not distant, in fact is far more intimate than a personal divinity could possibly be. The God of philosophy is not anywhere but everywhere. At a certain stage of human growth, man achieves to the realization of the insufficiency and inconsistency of a personal God. The mind then demands an impersonal agent at the foundation of action. It is not the purpose of philosophy to reconcile the concepts of a personal and an impersonal God. Only growth, development, and unfoldment within the individual can result in that state of mind in which the personal divinity fades away and consciousness discovers that vast and all-sufficient spirit which abides in the star and the grain of sand. What is creation? Creation as a process is a term employed to signify the process of objectification or the flow of invisible forces into visible manifestation. Creation is not technically the beginning of anything. It is merely ever-existing forces assuming temporary patterns. These patterns remain for a certain time and then dissolve again. The term for this dissolution is either disintegration or decay, but neither disintegration nor decay really signifies the end of anything. It is merely the breaking up of the pattern, the elements of which are in themselves immortal. Theologically speaking, creation is the formation of the tangible universe under the direction of cosmic or universal intelligences called the gods. Actually, creation is the incarnation of the gods, or supreme principles that build around themselves the form of the world, even as the incarnating human spirit builds its body. Therefore, the worlds are the bodies of the gods, subject to growth, maturity, and decay, even as the human body is subject to the vicissitudes of change. One definition for creation is release into tangibility. Thus, the creative power of man is the power to engender forms or patterns through which ideals, forces, or concepts are given expression or material release. When more profoundly considered, however, creation is the building of shells by which great forces are limited or circumscribed or intensified into prescribed areas. Creation is described in some of the ancient Oriental books as the curdling of space. Out of ever-existing elements, impermanent forms are fabricated. These forms, whether they be electrons or suns, are temporary manifestations of eternal forces. These forces exist whether they manifest or not. Creation is the process of their manifestation, and disintegration is their process of retiring from manifestation. The word creation may also signify that which has been created or manifested. In this sense, it is a term to describe the infinite diversity of manifestation in which man lives, moves, and has his being, and of which even the visible parts of man himself are examples. Creation is an inconceivable extension of forms, each of which is the embodiment of the forces. Forces all manifest according to law. Therefore, creation is geometrical or mathematical and is completely patterned. The order of creation is proverbial, but creation itself is merely a symbol, the visible shadow of things unseen. Creation is the body of sovereign intelligence, and man's effort to understand the real is closely linked with his contemplation of forms and laws. The real is invisible in itself, but is manifested in every atom of creation. The world is the real made form. Man is the real made soul. The urge which created the world is the same urge which in the human soul inspires man to create beauty, to invent, to devise, and to express his inward convictions by means of symbolic forms. Creation is the inward conviction of reality manifested through its most appropriate symbol. Plato calls creation the divine animal, the first of living things from which all lesser natures are suspended. Explain the great time cycles. The ancient Brahmins, meditating upon the mystery of creation, perceived with the inward eye the great cycles of time which make up the ages of the world. The Greek philosophers and the Egyptian priests also calculated the duration of ages and the various divisions of time which constituted cycles or periods of manifestation. In most ancient systems, the calculations were directed towards the discovery of the length of the cosmic life, or in the Oriental terminology, the age of Brahma. The unit of measurement was the human pulse beat. These were grouped together to form minutes. The minutes were grouped to form hours. The hours were compounded into days, the days were massed into years, and the years were arranged in great patterns called yugas and kalpas. In the Hindu system, there is a unit cycle called a yuga. 4 yugas constitute a mahayuga or great age. A mahayuga equals 4,320,000 human years. 71 mahayugas equal the period of the reign of one Manu or celestial king of the world, the total being 306,720,000 years. There are 14 Manus ruling in a day of manifestation, and their total reign equals 4,294,080,000 human years. The Sandhis, or connective twilights, which bind the reigns of the Manas together, are equal to 6 Mahayugas, or 25,920,000 years. These added to the previous figure complete the reign of 14 Manas as 1,000 Mahayugas, or 4,320,000,000 years. This total is called a day of Brahma. The night of Brahma, or the Pralaya, contains the same amount of time, so that one day and night requires 8,640,000,000 years. A year of Brahma consists of 360 such days and nights, or 3,110,400,000,000 human years. 100 such years of Brahma constitute the life of Brahma, in round figures 311,040,000,000,000 years. To the Hindus, Brahma is the supreme being of the manifested universe, and the so-called life of Brahma represents the period of Brahma's incarnation. At the end of his life, Brahma retires into a subjective existence to remain for an inconceivable period of time before remanifesting in a new life or age. Humanity at the present time has just passed the 5,000-year mark in a Kali Yuga, or Dark Age, equivalent to the Iron Age in the Greek calculation. The length of a Kali Yuga is 432,000 years, but within this collective time are smaller cycles of ascent and descent. But the Age of Obscuration, as it is called in the Hindu classification, has yet 427,000 years before its completion. At the end of the Kali Yuga, or Dark Age, the world will pass into the Krita Yuga, or Golden Age of the Gods, which will then continue for 1,728,000 human years. A summary of the opinions of the Hindus on the matter of the Yugas, particularly the Kali Yuga in which we now live, will set forth the significance of these time calculations in their relationship to human experience. In the 6th section of the Vishnu Purana, Maitreya asks wisdom, personified as Parasara, concerning the method of the dissolution of the universe, and how men might know that a greater or lesser kalpa is coming to an end. The sage, in answering him, gives us a viewpoint on life which we cannot fail to heed with the present stress which surrounds us in the world. The wise man, answering Maitreya, says in part that there are 4 ages, namely Krita, Treta, Dvapara, and Kali, and that all life is made up of these ages, repeated again and again. These periods may be called, for simple understanding, birth, growth, maturity, and decay. Quoting from the great sage Parasara, in the first Krita is that age which is created by Brahma, birth of things. In the last, which is the Kali age, a dissolution of the universe takes place. Kali is the principle of blackness, disintegration, death, and decay. Maitreya then says, "O venerable sir, it behooves thee to give a description of the nature of the Kali age, in which the 4-footed virtue suffers total extinction." The ancients taught that the destruction of virtue was the end of all things, and that the universal dwelling place collapsed, consumed by the flames of immorality. During the Kali age, environments destroy themselves and destruction avenges itself. That which is false falls a prey to its own falseness. Thieves steal from each other until crime, destroying itself, gives birth to a new virtue. Peoples vanish, races are overrun, and those who think they are proud collapse. Speaking in the terms of the Puranas, but leaving out the more obscure paragraphs, let us consider how Parasara informs his student that the coming of the end is to be foretold when Kali, the goddess of destruction, shall rule the planet. Parasara states that the end will be heralded by a number of things, in the midst of which Kali will devour creation, and a newer and purer world will take the place of that which has gone before. Literally thousands of years ago, the following indications of the beginning of the end were given to the Brahmans and, through the Puranas, to the world. Below is listed numerically those statements which have any bearing upon either our lives or our customs, as they are extracted from the words of Parasara. In the Kali age, 1. Marriage will be celebrated according to the rituals, but the spiritual rites of the communion of lives will be lost. 2. The student of wisdom shall be without a master, for the powers that connect the spiritual protector and his disciple will not be in force. 3. The laws that regulate the conduct of husband and wife will be neglected. 4. All celestials and spirits and lights and all orders of life will be considered as one and equal. 5. Fasting, austerity and liberality, practiced according to the pleasure of those by whom they are observed, shall constitute piety. 6. Every trifling property will make men proud of their wealth. 7. Wives will desert their husbands when they lose their wealth, and the rich will be considered lords. 8. He who distributes immense wealth will be considered as a master of men. 9. Accumulation of wealth will be spent in ostentatious dwellings. 10. The minds of men will be wholly occupied with earning money, and that will be spent on the gratification of selfish desires. 11. Women will follow their own inclinations and be given up to pleasure-seeking. 12. Men will endeavor to acquire riches even dishonestly. 13. No man will part with the smallest fraction of his wealth at the sacrifice of his own interest. 14. All people will consider themselves as equal with the Brahmanas, God-anointed or illuminated. 15. Cows will be held in reverence only because they supply milk, meaning that things are only of value for what one can get out of them. 16. People will always be in fear of dearth and scarcity and will watch accordingly the appearance of the sky. 17. Deprived of wealth, people will be perpetually subject to famines and other afflictions. They will never enjoy pleasure or happiness. 18. Children will pay no attention to the commands of their parents. 19. People will be selfish, abject and slovenly. They will be indecent, immoral in their conduct, and will ever attach themselves to the dissolute. 20. Householders will neither sacrifice nor practice becoming liberality. 21. Princes will plunder their subjects instead of protecting them, and under the pretexts of levying customs will rob the merchants of their property. 22. Everyone possessing cars, elephants and horses will be a Raja, meaning the possessions will be the measure of worth. 23. Everyone who is feeble will be a slave. 24. Farmers will abandon agriculture and commerce and seek to gain a livelihood by the exercise of mechanical arts. 25. The poor, seeking sustenance by assuming outward marks of virtue, will become the impure followers of impious and heretical doctrines. 26. Oppressed by famines and taxation, men will desert their native countries and repair to those lands which are fit for a coarser grain. 27. The path of the Vedas, scriptures, being obliterated, the people having deviated into heresy, iniquity will flourish, and the duration of life will therefore decrease. 28. On account of the horrible penances enjoined by false scriptures, and of the vices of the rulers, children will die in their infancy. Men will grow old at the age of 12, and no one will live more than 20 years. 29. The race will possess little sense, vigor, or virtue, therefore will die in a short time. The wise then estimate the approach of Kali when the numbers of the false increase and the numbers of the virtuous decrease. For the respect to the teacher declines and regard is cherished for the disseminators of heresy. 30. The principal caste will be the ignorant. The wise will vanish from among them. 31. Men shall say, "Who was my father? Who was my mother?" 32. Gifted with little sense, the race will be subject to all sorts of infirmities of mind, speech and body, and will daily commit sin, and everything that is likely to afflict beings, vicious, impure and wretched, will be generated in the Kali Yuga, Black Age. What is consciousness, intelligence and force? Pythagoras symbolized deity as an equilateral triangle, a simple diagram presenting three equal faces. Simon Magus, the Gnostic, also made use of the triangle to represent the aspects of what he called the profundity. The Kabbalists represented the Godhead by the first three manifestations or spheres of the Sephirothic tree. The Brahmins used the Trimurti or three-headed Brahma to represent causal energy. It will be found by an examination of various religious systems that the Godhead is almost invariably depicted as a trinity in unity. God is life. Life in the spiritual world is called consciousness. Life in the mental world is called intelligence. And life in the material world is called force. The divine quality, in its three manifestations, permeates and sustains the three worlds, called by Pythagoras the supreme sphere, the superior sphere, and the inferior sphere. Consciousness is the condition of self-knowing in which realization is intrinsic. Consciousness is therefore universal self-knowing, the sufficient realization of the self in all things. Only the gods are conscious, for only the divine beings are free from the limitations of intellect and are azonic, that is, unlimited by the boundaries of vehicles as we know them. All beings have bodies, but only the more subtle and universal bodies are capable of sustaining the experience of consciousness. Man approaches consciousness in the mystical experience of illumination, but is not equipped by his present organism to sustain this state consistently. Intelligence is individualized consciousness. By intelligence is to be understood the equilibrating and rationalizing faculty, which is present in entities capable of interpreting consciousness only through an intellectual organism. Intelligence is consciousness limited to the consideration of immanent things in the phenomenal or exterior life. With intelligence we can understand living, but intelligence cannot understand life. Intelligence is limited to the sphere of manifestations, and functioning upon abstract principles of form is incapable of understanding such principles as are formless or without manifestation through form. Intellect is called by Plato the self-moving principle because it is the apex of all action, contributing purpose and decision to both nature and man. The philosopher knows, however, that he must rise above intellect if he is to find the real force. When consciousness is interpreted in terms of energy or vitality, it is called force. Motion is evidence of life, even as intelligence is evidence of life. Force is circumscribed by the laws of the cosmos. All energies flow according to certain restrictions and act according to certain geometric patterns, which Plato called archetypes. Everywhere in nature, we see force creating patterns or revealing the law and consciousness along lines of crystallization or energy extension. Man's thoughts could not be interpreted into actions without the aid of the physical energy principle or consciousness as force. The motion of suns, the growing of plants, the arts, trades and crafts of mankind are all expressions of physical energy. But each of these expressions fulfills a superphysical purpose. Force by itself is purposeless and chaotic unless it is directed by intellect. Therefore, the Eastern philosopher says, force is the horse and thought, the rider. In occult philosophy, it is taught that the universe is created by consciousness, sustained by intellect, and finally disintegrated by force. Therefore, consciousness, intelligence, and force are referred to as creator, preserver, and destroyer. By destroyer is meant, however, rather the disintegrator, that which breaks up old patterns, but in no way adversely affects the life and intelligence within these patterns. What is spirit and what is matter? Spirit and matter are relative terms devised to signify two phenomenal conditions of one indivisible essence. Spirit and matter are the two fundamental aspects of life. Spirit and matter are interdependent terms. One has no significance without the other, for matter is the least degree of spirit and spirit is the highest degree of matter. In the sphere of mortals, spirit and matter are represented by good and evil, also interdependent terms. By spirit, the metaphysical philosopher understands the active principle of life. This principle Plato calls the unmoved mover of all things. By this definition, matter becomes the passive principle, or in the Platonic philosophy, that which is moved, or receives unto itself the energy of the active principle. Matter receiving upon itself what Böhmer, the German theosophist, called the seal or signature of the spirit, is arranged into patterns or forms which we call bodies. A body or form is ensouled matter or matter ensouled by spirit. In the Kabbalah, it was taught that the creating principle appeared as a vortex of spiritual energy in the midst of space. This vortex the Jewish mystics called Kether, or the crown of life. From the crown, rays of vibrant power flashed forth, impregnating all space. Space was regarded as atomic or made up of infinitely small particles, each seed-like, or as the Platonists would have called them, germinal. Universal life, flashing into each of the germs of space, activated the life principle in these germs. As a result of this activation, the germs unfolded from within, outwardly. The term spiritual nature was applied to the life element in each of the germs, and the term material form was applied to the outer coverings of the germ. The evolving monad, as Leibniz would have called these atoms, was growing up in space, and the dark, mysterious essence in which the atoms clothed themselves was termed matter. Matter is entirely invisible in its ultimate state. What we call matter is form, a compound of spiritual energies and activated matter. The Chinese signify this mystery by saying that the universe consists of three parts, heaven, earth, and man. By heaven they mean not the sky, but causal energy. By earth they mean not the element, but the universal receptive capacity which receives into itself the emanations of the creative power. By man they mean not humanity, but all forms, whether of suns, moons, stars, or man, which have arisen from the compounding of the two basic principles. Spirit is universal. It is one eternal life, called by the ancients a sea or ocean of ever-flowing good. Forms are innumerable vessels into which life flows, but though the containers be many, that which is contained is one and undivided. There are many forms, but only one spiritual essence. Thus, matter results in the illusion of diversity. Christian theology in particular fell into this illusion. It speaks not of spirit, but of spirits, and by this very statement denies the real fact. Mystics of all races have long known that there is only one spirit in the cosmos. There are not divine spirits, human spirits, and animal spirits, but one spirit flowing through divine, human, and animal forms. As water pouring into a vessel assumes the shape of its container, though in its own nature shapeless, so spirit flowing into form assumes the shapes of these forms and appears to assume the similitudes of its bodies. But the Taoists of China know that as the springs flow into the streams, and the streams flow into the rivers, and all the rivers flow into the great sea, so evolution is the imprisoned life in all things, flowing through innumerable forms back to the sea of its own universality. What are the 7 laws of life? In different schools, different names are given to the great laws which control the universe, but it is generally acknowledged that the number of these laws is 7, and that their influence is without exception, and that neither God nor man can in any way alter or modify their influence. Man, by changing himself, may change his relationship to these laws and come into better harmony with the divine purpose, but the laws themselves are immutable. The following is one arrangement or conception of the 7 great laws of life. 1. Evolution. That all things are unfolding is the first law of life. Evolution, or more correctly, ideation, is a gradual release from within of the divine potency behind form. The growth of bodies and development of form bear witness to the emergence of inward spiritual forces. The grain of sand unfolds into the man, and the man unfolds into a sun. In the axioms of the ancient alchemists, there is one that says, "There is a sun in every grain of sand, all is in all. One is in all, and all is in one." Evolution is the constant coming outward of the within of things. It is not life growing from one state to another, but life gradually emerging and assuming new appearances at each degree of its emergence. 2. Cause and effect. Next only to evolution in significance is the law of cause and effect, or in human relationships, karma, or compensation. It is the law of cause and effect which decrees that every action in the universe must be followed by an appropriate reaction, and to this there is no exception of any kind at any time for any reason. In the words of Buddha, effect follows cause as the wheel of the cart follows the foot of the oxen. In human affairs, cause and effect, as karma, decrees that every individual is individually responsible for his own actions, and that every action will produce a reaction equivalent in every way to the integrity of the action. The student should always remember that karma is good as well as bad. The only reason why most people see more of retribution than reward is because their own code of action has been more selfish than intelligent. Do not wait for good karma, make it now. 3. Polarity. All things in nature are dominated by the law of polarity and the correlative fact that poles are constantly alternating. The law of polarity in the universe is manifested in the relationship between suns and their planets, and also throughout nature in the principle of male and female or sexual differentiation. It should be remembered that the spiritual principle in all things is androgynous, but that in manifestation it is always polarized. By the law of alternation, for example, the human soul coming into life incarnates in either a male or female body. In the process of reincarnation, the sex of the body alternates, being male in one life and female in another. Even the earth itself not only has poles, but by a third motion is slowly reversing its poles so that which has been the south will at some time be the north. The law of polarity is universal. 4. Reincarnation. This is the law of evolution applied to the experience of individualized living things. The law of reincarnation teaches that all the kingdoms of nature are waves of life moving through form, or rather moving through levels of forms. Man, learning the experiences of the physical world, lives here not once but many times, his life being really measured by the whole span of human evolution. In the search for experience, the human spirit returns to the physical world many times, there to work out its karma and perfect itself in the consciousness of the life wave. 5. Vibration. This law is the basis of all the differentiation in the universe. Spirit is a rate of vibration. Thought is a rate of vibration. The universe is a complex of vibratory rates. Vibration is the first manifestation of life and is the nearest thing to God that man can conceive. By discipline and effort, man can raise the vibration of the cells of his own body. This is called refinement. Thoughts are vibrations and therefore are capable of influencing those to whom they are directed. Music is vibration. Color is vibration. If man can completely understand vibration, he will be master of most of the secrets of the world. 6. Harmony and rhythm. There is a difference between vibration and motion, actually only a difference of intensity. But in the phenomenal life of man, an important difference is application. The law of harmony and rhythm shows that all motions in the cosmos are dominated by a certain flowing order. The universe does everything beautifully. Man, living beautifully, comes into harmony with life and moves with the rhythm of the world. By cultivating harmony and rhythm in himself, man becomes conscious of the universal motion which the Taoists call Tao, the ever-flowing reality. The dervish Jalal-ud-Din sought to whirl his own body in harmony with the rhythm of the spheres. Pythagoras said that he, of all men, alone could hear the music of the 7 planets. All the universe sings and every atom is dancing to the rhythm of the suns. 7. Generation. This law teaches that in the world of form, all things must increase by the law of generation. By this law, only wholeness or completeness can produce. The law of polarity has resulted in a division of forms in order that in each sex, part of the creative power could be devoted to the building of intellect. The law of generation therefore decrees everywhere in nature that the reproduction of any kind of form, emotion, or thought must arise from the union of 2 polar opposites. This is evidenced in the human brain by the 2 hemispheres which must combine their forces before even a thought can be born. First study these laws to the degree that you are familiar with their workings, then look about you in nature and life and perceive how inevitably these laws work out. Having convinced yourself of this fact, live in harmony with these laws yourself, realizing that peace and security result from living the law and not from trying to break it, evade it, or escape its consequences. What are the 7 continents, or epochs? In the secret doctrines of Asia, it is taught that the earth passes through 7 ages, or major changes in its physical nature. These changes result in 7 major continental distributions, or, in more simple terms, the map of the earth presents in the course of the planet's duration 7 appearances. The Earth's surface is always changing to some degree, and these constant changes build up 7 major patterns or surface groupings of land and water. These 7 groupings, called continents, support the 7 races. Each new major change in the consciousness of living things demands a new environment in which to perfect itself. Life is like a great play with 7 acts, and nature is constantly changing the scenery so that each act may take place in an appropriate environment. The gradual cooling of the Earth, which occurred in the dawn of the world, brought into physical solidity first the polar caps. The axial rotation of the Earth being the slowest at the poles, these cooled first, producing the twin continents Pan and Isuvia. The North Polar Continent is called the Imperishable Island by Eastern occultists. It was upon this polar cap in the first ages of the world that the gods descended, and here all life had its physical beginning. As the cooling of the Earth continued, the second major continental distribution took form. The Greeks called this the Hyperborean world, a term which means the land that is north of the winds. The Earth's surface was still covered with mists, and with the exception of the polar continent, was subject to constant volcanic change. The third continental distribution was approximately equatorial. The Earth's crust had completely hardened. This third continental distribution is called Lemuria. To this land migrated the various waves of life which had their beginning at the polar cap. Parts of what are now Ceylon, the Australasian archipelago, Australia, and the central parts of South America and Africa are remnants of the Lemurian continental distribution. The greater part of the Lemurian world is now submerged, involving the area of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean bed. The fourth continental distribution is called Atlantean. The name is derived from Plato's description as perpetuated in the Critias. The principal center of the Atlantean world was a great continent extending from Labrador and Greenland on the north to Brazil and West Africa on the south. The rise of this continent required millions of years, and it was slowly destroyed over long periods of time. The cataclysms which brought about the final submergence of Atlantis began more than 1 million years ago. But the last part of Atlantis, the island of Poseidonis, sank about BC 10,000. The continental distributions overlapped each other to some degree, and a considerable part of the Lemurian distribution was modified to form the Atlantean pattern. The fifth continental distribution, called the Aryan, is that with which modern man is familiar. A great part of the land area of Atlantis and Lemuria remains, built into the New World pattern. The civilizations on these continents have been broken up, although strong centers of Atlantean culture still flourish in China, and Africa is still populated by the descendants of the Lemurians. The sixth and seventh continental distributions are yet to come. It is widely believed that the center of the sixth continent will rise in the Pacific and will incorporate a considerable part of what is now called the Western Hemisphere. The seventh continental distribution will probably be Asiatic. That is, it will be a new arrangement taking place in that part of the Earth now involving Japan, China, and Siberia. It should be remembered that Atlantis, Lemuria, and all the old land distributions were not single continents arising in one place, but were land distributions affecting the whole surface of the Earth. The development of each continent involves a considerable part of the land area of the preceding continents. In each case, however, the great cultural systems flourished from centers which have come to be identified as the whole continent. The highest civilization of the Atlanteans, for example, arose on that part of Atlantis, which has now disappeared under the Atlantic Ocean. For that reason, many people believe that the submerged continent was all of Atlantis. This is not true for large parts of land in Africa, Asia, and America, and a considerable part of Europe were above the water during the Atlantean epoch. Possibly this can best be expressed by what we call Western civilization. We think of Europe and America as ruling the world in this epoch, but this does not mean that the rest of the world does not exist. The present Aryan distribution involves land on all parts of the Earth, and so did the preceding distributions, with the exception of the polar and Hyperborean continents, which were formed before the entire surface of the Earth had cooled. For a discussion of the races evolving on the various continents, see the next question. What are the races of man? The ancient doctrines teach that during the present life wave, 7 races, or more correctly, species and races, will be developed. The first races were the will-born, sometimes called the sons of yoga, for they precipitated their chayas or shadows through intense meditation. These shadows, the prototypes of bodies, were not as dense as our present physical forms, but correspond in state to a dense mist. The shape of these chayas was very different from that of our present physical bodies. They were roughly globular and semi-transparent, with more opaque or denser areas distributed through them. These areas later became vital centers. The most highly evolved of these sensitized fields, which occupied approximately the upper pole of the spherical body, was the third eye, which, as the forms crystallized, retired from objective manifestation until it completely closed or ceased to function as an organ of spiritual perception during the Lemurian period. Though the sons of will or yoga precipitated these shapes, they did not actually enter into them, but remained suspended over them, connected by etheric threads through which magnetic forces were transmitted. A somewhat similar condition still exists in the case of the animal, for the monads of animal life are still partly outside of the physical bodies. When seen clairvoyantly, the animal presents somewhat the same appearance as occasionally occurs optically in the case of double vision. 2 images not quite together, whereas in man the registration of the 2 is perfect. Having established their shadows, the sons of will began to spin a web, uniting the shadows to themselves, or, if viewed physically, united themselves to the shadows. Millenniums of time passed during which the sweat-born and the egg-born appeared, being various stages in the development of the mechanism of generation. During this whole period, the creatures were androgynous. The first races did not propagate at all, the Chayas remaining until the Pralaya destroyed them all. Nor was the element of growth present. Later, the shadows multiplied by fission, that is, in the way that cells multiply at the present time, the main difference being that the parts did not increase in size. The bodies, continually decreasing in magnitude, were finally destroyed because they were incapable of growth and were soon reduced to a state where they could not serve as vehicles for organized life. In later species, growth was added, and what is now commonly called the pudding bag men appeared. The sac-like form was apparently tied at the neck, at which point the pineal gland extended as an organ of both sense perception and the rudiments of motion. It gradually developed into a pseudopod, somewhat resembling the finger-like protuberance of the clam. These bodies, while far more dense than those of the will-born, were still entirely too attenuated to leave fossil remains, and anthropology will never be able to establish their existence save through analogy, or by studying the recapitulations of previous cycles of existence which appear in the developing embryo. Still later we have the gill-cleft man. The atmosphere of the Earth had not yet cleared, and the entire sphere was surrounded by a thick wall of humid, semi-liquid vapors. It was not until the clearing of the Earth's atmosphere in the Lemurian period that lungs began to appear. By the fifth subrace of the Lemurian period, physical bodies had taken on approximately their present appearance. Save that they were extremely low in organic quality. The flesh resembled wood pulp in the very early Lemurians and showed a coarseness resembling beef in the later subdivisions. Giantism had then appeared, for form always runs riot until mind, demanding the greater part of the vital forces for its functioning, pulls down body to the degree that intellectual functioning increases. There were also monstrosities upon the earth due to the interbreeding of human and animal strains. This occurred at the psychological moment when the unfolding human cycle was recapitulating its animal development. At no other time could they have been generated and live. In the fifth subrace of Lemuria, approximately 19 million years ago, the actual division of the sexes took place. This involved a cataclysmic change in the psychological organism of the evolving type, the complications being revealed symbolically in the allegory of the fall of man. It is necessary at this time to pause for a moment and call attention to a special point which might otherwise definitely confuse the issues involved. Up to the time when the gods, that is the egos, took upon themselves the daughters, the bodies of men, and entered into them, two complete evolutions were moving side by side. Man was evolving in the spiritual worlds, that is, upon the higher planes of the earth, at the same time that he was building bodies upon the lower. In fact, in some of the traditions, it is described how races were divided among the continents before the races had developed any temporal bodies whatever. When the Vahans or vehicles had gradually emerged from chaos into an organized state, two orders of evolution, the one spiritual and the other physical, were actually united. Previous to that time, the bodies had no consciousness other than that which man experiences during dreamless sleep now. The later sub-races of Lemuria spread through the Australasian archipelago, increasing in number and power and developing the rudiments of several new sense perceptions. They even built cities and developed languages by imitating the sounds of nature in her various moods. The fourth, or Atlantean root race, resembled our own in nearly all of its biological attributes. The Atlanteans were the first to engage in warfare with its resultant disturbance in the life cycles. The birth rate therefore rapidly increased, whereas previously the Lemurians, some of them living for centuries, did not require as many vehicles for incarnation. It was also the Atlanteans who first began to dabble in magic, even to the point of breeding monsters by thought power. These creatures were incapable of reproduction, however, and like Frankenstein's monster, turned upon their own creators. All of these practices disturbed the astral light, which finally permeated with noxious psychical forces bred by the Atlantean sorcerers, brought about the cataclysms which ultimately destroyed the Atlantean civilization. The fourth subrace of the Atlanteans marked the real turning point of human evolution. During this fourth subrace, bodies reached their greatest degree of crystallization. From that time on, life, which had been exuding forms, began the process of reabsorbing them into itself again. The process by which this is accomplished is called by the profane refinement, being simply the breaking up of the form patterns which by their density create the condition of materiality. The fifth root race, of which we are a part, is well on its way along the ascending path which leads to liberation from the consciousness of form. For as the wise fully realize, form is actually a condition of mind. In fact, it is part of the work of the will-born, who meditated matter into being that they might organize it into form. By the end of the fifth root race, the physical body of man will be far more attenuated than it is now, and the sixth root race will bring with it the blue men from whom nothing can be concealed. The blue signifies ether, which is still somewhat visible to the physical perceptions of man as the haze which hangs at the base of mountains, this haze being part of the etheric double of the earth. In India, the god Vishnu is shown with a blue face to signify the highly etherealized substances from which his bodies are formed. During the blue race, form will still exist, but will resemble somewhat the matter composing the planet Jupiter, which, while a solid, would be incapable of supporting physical man upon its surface. He would fall through it as he falls through water. As the etheric body asserts itself more definitely, both the arterial and venous functions will decrease while the nervous activity will be greatly stimulated. The sixth root race, not to be confused with the sixth subrace of our present fifth root race, which subrace, however, will be the progenitors of the new cycle, will develop two spinal columns, representing an equilibrium of the sympathetic and cerebrospinal nervous systems. The skin will undergo a definite metamorphosis, and all the sense perceptions will be highly sensitized. During this period, the androgynous man will reappear, and it is affirmed by several occultists of note that at this time the larynx will be the organ of generation. In other words, creation will be through the spoken word. At last, with the coming of the seventh race, the two spinal columns will be reunited into one, and the general appearance of the whole body will undergo great change and modification. The attenuating processes will have been carried so far that all the grosser elements will have been reabsorbed through transmutation into the spiritual nature. At such time, it is declared that generation will cease. The first race, which never actually died, but lives on in all the races which come after it, the adepts of the seventh round as sons of will and yoga, will awaken from the meditation which precipitated them into generation, to find the whole of this thing which we call life to have been but a figment of consciousness. Thus it is written that when the Kumaras, or the virgin souls, awake from the seven dreams, they will discover that they were never actually in evolution at all, but that what we term evolution was actually taking place within them, a mystery of yoga. Explain the difference between body, mind, soul, and spirit. The term body should properly be applied to any one of the several vehicles of manifestation which the ego or self emanates from its own being to serve as mediums of expression or function. The most generally recognized bodies in the case of man are the physical, vital, emotional, and mental. Bodies are not necessarily visible, nor are they always tangible to any physical sense perception. To use Plato's simple definition, a body is any structure or form to which energy is communicated. Mind is variously defined in different schools of metaphysics. It is most generally accepted as the coordinated sublimation of bodily impulses. In other words, it represents the sum of the numerous instincts and impulses enlivened or quickened by a ray of rational energy, from that which the ancients termed the self, or the spiritual overbeing from which personality is suspended. Mind is the mediator between spirit and body, referred to as the common ground. The position which the mind occupies in man, halfway between invisible cause and visible effect, has given rise to nearly all the messianic religious doctrines of the world. In several schools of philosophy, the Messiah is enlightened mind, which finally lifts the personality to truth through its own nature. Soul is a very loosely used term. The indiscriminate misapplication of terms causes endless confusion among the schools of metaphysics. Soul is generally regarded as synonymous with spirit, but the ancients regarded soul as an intuitional body built up in man by the assimilation of experience. Men perform wise and unwise deeds. These actions give rise to experience, and experience justifies action. No matter how much a man may suffer, if this suffering results in experience, it is worth all that it costs. Soul is the spiritual gold arising from the transmutation of the baser instincts and emotions. In the ancient mysteries, the soul is termed the robe of glory. It is the spotless, seamless garment of transmuted emotion, thought, and action, which each disciple of truth must wear when he seeks admission to the hidden house. Spirit to the ancients meant life. Not life in its physical aspect of vitality, but rather that universal life principle which pervades, animates, and sustains existence. Specifically, the term is applied to the causal substance in man, the abstract life energy, the abiding reality in the midst of ever-changing appearances. To the Eastern philosopher, spirit is never regarded as individualized. One man does not have one spirit and another man another spirit. Spirit is universal. All diversity ends in spirit, and spirit is never divided. Thus, men are an innumerable race of personalities divided in form, indivisible in spirit. What are the 7 bodies of man? Man is a composite being consisting of 7 superphysical principles manifesting through the body, which is referred to as the 8th part of the soul. The superphysical principles are the causes of all the phenomena of physical life. Man's thoughts come from his mental nature, and his mental nature is the manifestation of his mental body. Man's emotions come from his emotional nature, and his emotional nature is the manifestation of his emotional body. The physical body is, therefore, a victim of the thoughts, feelings, and desires which are communicated to it by what the Greeks called the 7 parts of the soul. In their septenary classification, the ancients did not generally include the physical body, which is merely the container and manifester of the 7 active principles. We place it here that it may appear in its proper position in the concatenation of ascending qualities. In occult textbooks, the superphysical bodies are generally set forth in the following order. 1. The etheric body. This is the etheric counterpart of the physical body and is the sustainer and vitalizer of the material form. It controls growth and the digestive and assimilative processes and repairs the damages caused in the physical body by the wear and tear of living. 2. The emotional body. This vehicle is divided into 2 parts, the lower being the seat of the appetites and sensations, and the higher the seat of the aesthetic and constructive emotions. The emotional body also controls the motion of the physical form and directs the sensory perceptions with their instinctive emotional reflexes. 3. The lower mental body. This is the animal mind body of the Greek system of philosophy and the mortal or illusional mind of the Vedantists. It is the body of objective thought and controls man's personal decisions and all his mental reactions based upon education and environment. The perceptions and the mental emotional reflexes have their origin in the lower mental body. 4. The higher mental body. This is the divine mind of the ancients. This higher mentality is the root of philosophical realization, the sphere of creative thinking. It is this mind that is manifested in the genius and is regarded in most systems of philosophy as more than human. This is the heroic intellect of Plato. The cycle of reincarnation carries the entity no higher between lives than the higher mental body, which is the apex of personality. Although the term bodies is sometimes given to the 3 higher parts of man, the word principles is more expressive. Above the mental world, man's personality is merged into universal qualities. 5. The Buddhic principle. The 5th body or principle of man is the vehicle of illumination. The adept, lifting his consciousness to this plane or inward level of himself, finds here an extension of his realization from thinking to knowing. The term Buddhic means inwardly enlightened. 6. The atmic or causal principle. This is the highest differentiated principle in man and is his consciousness in an undivided and unconditioned state. It is from the causal body that the personalities emanate. It is the root of the phenomena of his lives. It is the ever-meditating Lord who sits serene above experience, the Father in heaven. 7. The One. This is the universal source, the common denominator of all living things, the eternal earth of space and spirit, from which grow all the seeds of the world of gods and of men. The inconceivable and indescribable source, called by the Egyptians the thrice deep darkness and by the Jews, Ain the boundless. In the seventh principle, all things are one. The ego or individuality is the higher mental nature. The individuality is personalized in the lower bodies and universalized in the three parts higher than itself. It is most important to the realization of all students that they understand that their vehicles or bodies ascend from personal and individual existence through gradual stages of impersonalization until, at the summit, all life converges to and is absorbed in the one first principle. The intellect cannot ascend to this realization. Therefore, philosophy teaches that man must rise above thought to the three higher principles, which are terms of consciousness. Even consciousness has divisions within itself. Man is capable of reaching the real because he has a ladder of bodies within himself, up which he ascends through the disciplines of philosophy or the slower processes of evolution. Thus he finally reaches the universal reality, which is the ultimate of progress in our present cosmic system. What is truth? Pilate's question has been asked 100 million times by the heart of man groping for the real. Truth is a small word, a symbol of the vastest principle conceivable by human consciousness. Most of the mistakes of humanity have been committed in the name of truth. After thousands of years of human speculation, no adequate or appropriate definition of truth has ever been devised. We can speak about it, but what it is, we may not say. No man possesses truth, but more and more wise men are possessed by it. It is the over-reality, the absolute fact that can find no pattern in the world of relative things. Everything is truth, but nothing manifests it fully. All forms, all thoughts, all feelings, all actions are fragments of reality. But even when all these fragments are put together, truth is not perfect. For included in it are innumerable factors of which the human consciousness has not the slightest awareness. Only the real knows the real, only truth knows truth. For man, truth is integrity. It is most highly manifested in man's instinctive realization of the nobility of life. It is the urge in all things to be perfect, even though man does not know what perfection is. It is the root of the urge to accomplish. It is that something which makes all creatures dissatisfied in themselves because they feel sure of some far distant and infinite sufficiency. In searching for the highest manifestations of truth in nature, man has found that equilibrium, normalcy, and that permanence which avoids all extremes come the closest to a satisfying standard. In living, truth is virtue. In thinking, truth is wisdom. In feeling, truth is beauty. In action, truth is moderation. Yet all these commendable things together are not enough. Truth is most of all the ever-evident sufficiency. It is absolute reason, absolute security, transcendent completeness. In everything that is, there is a certain evidence of adequate purpose. All things are themselves, and there is a gloriousness about this fact that brings to the thoughtful mind a faint shadow of truth. Truth is, and all that is truth. And in the transcendent fact of truth's complete and inevitable existence, man finds the strength for his endeavor, the courage for his conviction, and an ever-present sense of all-pervading reality. Will the finality of life ever be known? It is difficult for a person who is part of a forever growing universe to even think in terms of finality. Ultimates are dangerous thoughts. They are intellectual barriers to those realizations of infinity which are natural to the inner life of man. Man reaches finality by becoming finality, for all ultimates are God. Man is as far from ultimates as he is from absolute divinity. The philosophers conceive no static states beyond action. To the Buddhist, that nirvana, which is the end of finites, is merely the beginning of infinites. When men grow too wise to be men, they become ever-growing wisdom. Occasionally we meet metaphysicians who suffer from the delusion that they will speedily achieve to the end of all human seeking and will repose individually in the perfection of ultimate accomplishment. These poor souls have been deluded either by themselves or by others. In the words of the old teaching, life is ever becoming, but it never becomes. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.